I got this call from Bryan Johnson and this team at Kernel, and they were like, do you want to move to LA and build something to measure the brain? It only took 5 years of life and about $50 million of investment. I regularly do BrainAge measurements. I'm 40, almost 41 now, and my BrainAge hovers around 36, 37. I've done some things like travel and then measure my BrainAge, and you can see that the impact it has, the acute impact it has on the way your brain is functioning. Psilocybin is the first psychedelic approved for the treatment of major depressive disorder. Then now you've got a longer menu of options to give people. And how do you decide who's getting what? Who gets Spravato, who gets TMS, who gets ECT, and who gets psilocybin? Do you just listen to the patient preference and hope it works? Or do you want to use data to identify the right one? What's going to be the future is something like Kernel, which is this more universal, broad platform in neuropsychiatric drug development, which is identify the patients who are likely to respond to a new drug based on their patterns of brain activity.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Human 3 podcast. Today, we're in Los Angeles with Ryan Field, the CEO of Kernel, a neurotechnology company dedicated to building actionable insights from high-quality brain data. Welcome, Ryan. Nice hat.
Hi, Sam. Thanks for having me. I'm glad to actually host you here in the Kernel offices. You know, I've been listening to your podcast, and I think you mentioned Kernel 3 times, and so here I've appeared, and
summoned him.
Really, really excited to chat with you guys today.
Yeah,
this is our first on-site podcast too. We've never done a in the office type podcast. You can see the beautiful brain behind Ryan if you look behind his glorious Kernel headset that he's wearing.
It's a beautiful office. We're very happy to be here. And like you said, I summoned this. Like Beetlejuice, if you say Kernel 3 times, you magically end up in the office somehow. So thanks for having us. So, you know, we're going to talk about a lot today, but I want to give everyone a little bit of context on your history at Kernel. So you're an inventor of dozens of patents here. You've spearheaded over 6 publications in Nature Scientific Reports, the Journal of Biomedical Optics, Neurophotonics, and a few others to be named. And you're also leading the team on a number of projects, but you've conducted 2 clinical studies and many other research studies as well. So you've been here for quite a while. Could you give us a little bit of background into how you went from being a PhD in electrical engineering and working on developing ASICs to, you know, designing a brain reading tool?
And first, I will say all of those things I did not do alone by any means. So, you know, there's a great team at Kernel, many leaders that are pushing forward these different initiatives. At this point, I'm largely enabling the company to really drive and make great progress here. So, you know, my own personal journey, as you said, I started out as an electrical engineer. You know, I studied electrical engineering and physics in undergrad at NC State, went to Columbia and did my PhD. Spent a while there doing everything, top to bottom, designing ASICs, all the way to writing some application level software for doing a relatively obscure type of microscopy, something that, you know, is not widely used, but is important in some biomedical research. From Columbia, I went to Intel, worked in their research labs, designing chips there in what was at the time a very cutting edge 14 nanometer process. Today it's, down in the 3 single digits. Left Intel after a couple of years to work at a startup building LiDAR sensors. So moving in the autonomous vehicle phase, a lot of hype in the Bay Area around, new sensors and self-driving cars and everything. This is like 2015 era. And, went from being one of 2 or 3 companies working in this space to one of 100, just very crowded, tons of people working here. And I got this call from Bryan Johnson and this team at Kernel, who I'd never heard of before, not even came across my radar in any way. And they were like, hey, your PhD work is really interesting. Your background in building time-of-flight sensors is interesting. Your experience running, startup teams and building chips to develop new sensors is great. Do you want to move to LA and build something to measure the brain? And I was like, Yes. Right. Like, why work on trying to make cars have perception when we can work on understanding our own perception and cognition and the way our brains function? And so as an engineer, that was like an incredibly interesting opportunity to really come and, build something new, to understand something so complex and, rich in a lot of ways.
Yeah. And that's how you ended up with what's on your head right now. If you want to take it off, let's maybe see how much it weighs. It's quite heavy, isn't it?
Sure.
Little show and tell.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it only took 5 years of life and about $50 million of investment and a lot of long nights and late, busy weekends to build this. But
you hold it a little higher.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, there you go. Show it to that camera there.
Show it
there
to this guy.
Beautiful. Look at that. So look, you can see perfectly inside those little things. What are those? Hey everyone, pardon the interruption. I just want to let you know that this podcast is an effort of Exia, a venture capital fund that Sam and I run that invests in what we call Human 3, the next epic of human health, well-being, and performance. One of our most exciting investment themes is psychedelic medicine. If you're an investor and want to learn more about how we view the psychedelic biotech world and our strategies for investing in psychedelics via both the public and private markets, we're hosting a webinar on July 30th to discuss all this and more. You can sign up for free at scibio.org. That's PSYBIO.org. All right, back to the show.
Yeah, so these are our optodes, and an optode is like an electrode, but we use light to interface with the head and measure the brain activity, so we call it an optode. And they're a combination of pulsed laser sources, so we're firing these really short pulses of laser light into the head, and then measuring how long it takes for that light to come out. And when I say how long, I'm talking on the order of nanoseconds, so very short times. And this approach is called time domain functional near-infrared spectroscopy. So the time domain is really the short, time of flight measurement that we're doing, and is very similar to what's done in LiDAR and other applications. So the reason we were able to even build this headset is thanks to our friends in the consumer electronics space who have developed some LiDAR for their own use cases. So you may know things like the iPad Pro and iPhone, the iPhone Pro models. They have a LiDAR built in. And so some of these advances in building consumer-grade LiDAR for doing things like AR and autofocusing of cameras, brought the technology forward enough, the tech stack, that you could actually leverage some of the CMOS processes, the chip design processes, to build new sensors that actually could measure the brain. So if you had tried to do this, build this product in 2012, the technology wasn't there. But because we were getting started in 2018, when some of these consumer tools were coming to market and the autonomous driving LiDAR environment was already there, also kind of pushing the chip technologies forward in this space, we were able to leverage all the progress that was made for those applications and adopt it for brain measurement.
So during your first few years at Kernel, you were thinking about how you could essentially translate this new, basically engineering a new physics to a different form factor to measure something organic and biological. And obviously, I mean, I'm assuming that it didn't just kind of come into fruition overnight sort of thing. How did that process of iterating and kind of going through product iterations look like over the years? I think Kernel was founded by Bryan Johnson in 2016, so the same year that Neuralink was founded, if I'm not mistaken, right? So what did that look like between 2016 and now?
Yeah, and so to be clear, I wasn't around in 2016 when Kernel was founded. The early days of Kernel were spent exploring some invasive approaches to measuring the brain. And it was kind of late 2017 when they made the pivot into non-invasive and started to explore all the different modalities and biophysics for measuring brain function. And I remember when I joined, one of the hardest things as an engineer and someone who was also coming from an automotive sensing industry. Hardest thing was, you would talk to the neuroscientists and the people working on the application side of things. It's like, well, what's the requirements? Like, what do you actually need in order to measure this thing that you're trying to get? And everyone would, say, they wouldn't actually say this, but they would give you some long-winded answer. And like really what it is like no one knows. Mm-hmm. No one knows what was needed, what was kind of the minimum level of technology and capability needed to actually measure the signals we were after. And so the hardest thing about the early days of Kernel and building this non-invasive tech was figuring out what the requirements even were so that we knew how to optimize on the engineering side. And so we went through 4 generations of chip designs before we even got here, right? It cost us $50 million to build this headset, or to develop this headset, I should say. This headset did not cost $50 million to build. Yes. The technology cost $50 million to develop because it was a bit of trial and error. You had to over-engineer some things, give it to the neuroscientists and let them test and see what signatures they could measure and how far they could get with what you've built, and then figure out where you could dial things back so that you can kind of tune the performance of the chips, performance of the sensors, the systems, et cetera, so that you can still achieve what the neuroscientists are after, but within a form factor that can be worn and is portable. So you've never seen the I should give you guys a tour later, but you've never seen the early days of Kernel. Our first systems were suspended from the ceiling by like a huge arm that we mounted. It's like from Uline, like a steel arm that was holding all these fibers and measurement things down and just like connecting to the head.
Very Westworld-y kind of.
Yeah, I mean, it was not a pleasant experience, but it was something to see, and that's what we used to figure out what to build.
Right, that makes sense. Well, I was going to ask, you mentioned sort of that there was an exploration in the early days of invasive ways to measure the brain, and then eventually you decided to pivot to the non-invasive. And when you look at all of the brain-computer interface companies that have raised, let's say, over $100 million, there aren't that many of them. Kernel is one of them. And Kernel, I think, is the only one that is focused on non-invasive, while the others, Neuralink, Synchron, BlackRock, those are the ones that I can think of off the top of my head that have raised substantial capital. All the others are doing invasive, meaning that there's surgery involved and there's something literally implanted into your head. And sure, there are some smaller startups that are doing non-invasive, but you guys are like probably the dominant non-invasive player. Can you talk a little bit about why that decision was made to go from the invasive approach to the non-invasive?
Yeah, I can recount some of the conversations that I had.
Yeah, and I know you weren't the one that ultimately called the decision in those days, but even just speaking philosophically on the differences, I think is interesting because the word brain-computer interface encompasses a lot of different things, and it's kind of useful to figure out how to break these things down and understand the trade-offs between the different approaches.
Yeah, definitely. So I think one of the biggest things, there are kind of 2 factors in it. One was time to market. So knowing that if you're going to go down an invasive route, especially this is 2016, 2017 era, it was a 10-year-ish journey before you could get to market, and so very capital intensive, development timeline. You need neurosurgeries, all of this like complexity, which if your objective is to do some of the rehabilitative type surgery applications, or like you're restoring voice, restoring motor function, like invasive is absolutely the way to go and the right move to make. But if you're getting some this may be some controversial to some, but I believe that if you're trying to build something for the masses, right, like you really think about the logistics of getting brain surgery, and it's just not something that's going to serve 1 billion people. And so you need to shift to a non-invasive way of thinking. And part of the reason that Kernel raised so much money and we spent so much money in development, we've raised over $100 million. We've spent over $100 million to get to where we are today. But not all of that was developing flow. That was exploring everything out there. And what was really unique about Kernel in the early days is that Bryan had the vision to come in without any bias, right? So he wasn't coming out of an academic lab where he just spent 7 years of his life working on this problem and, doing a postdoc and all these things, and was like really anchored to a specific technology. He wanted to solve a specific problem, which was how can we best measure the brain? Unbiased.
Right.
And it took some money to figure that out, a lot of money. And we built a lot of prototypes in those early years to figure out where to go. And, spent probably close to $50 million building an MEG system, developing all that technology just to see how far we could push that technology along, because it's a great option for measuring the brain non-invasively. It's really hard to do in a scalable way, though.
MEG being a magnetic type of brain reading technology that has some drawbacks and that you guys decided to drop at a certain point.
Yes.
I mean, I was going to say, so just to kind of pull back a little bit and think about what the original vision was, to, and as you just mentioned, to, in the best way possible, in a very scalable and accessible way, measure the brain and measure a specific signal. Maybe you weren't sure what that signal was going to be at the beginning, but measure it in the best way possible with the most accuracy and precision so that you could improve temporal and spatial resolution of brain data generally. And I think a good way to provide an analogy for those listening that we talk about a lot is it's kind of between an MRI and an EEG, I guess, mode of data collection. Do you want to maybe talk a little bit about that too?
Yeah. And before I go into that sort of comparison, I also want to draw this other distinction between invasive or implantable and non-invasive or non-implantable technologies. And this is really important early on, and a constraint that we imposed on ourselves is that if you're an implanted device, you have to pick the location of the brain where you want to implant. And then you can see with very high resolution that one particular area. And so you're kind of limiting yourself based on where you implant and what you can do. And we said we want technologies that you can look at the whole brain at the same time, right? Our brains are this, really complex, beautiful organ that, does things that we don't even quite understand still today. And the only way to make sense of that and understand it is to have a technology that can look at everything. And so we accepted the fact that our resolution wouldn't be as good as an invasive technology, knowing that the trade-off we get is we can look at everything and we can really understand, what the brain is doing altogether. So in terms of the technology where it falls between an fMRI and an EEG, what we've really done is, first we include EEG in our system. So we have a low density EEG subsystem in our headset. And that gives us this neurological measure of brain activity, what the electronic signals coming from the brain look like, a very coarse way. The thing that we really innovated on was this time domain fNIRS approach, which allows us to measure hemodynamic activity. And by hemodynamic, I mean changes in brain oxygenation over time. So the dynamics, the way that oxygen is moving within the brain over time. And this is what is very similar to fMRI. And the big difference that we have between a functional MRI, magnetic resonance imaging, and fNIRS, functional near-infrared spectroscopy, is that we use light to measure those changes instead of magnetic fields. And because we use light, we can only see the outer 2 centimeters or so of the cortex. So we're constrained to only being able to see the cortex, but we can see the whole cortex. And we can do it at a fraction of the cost and at much better scale than anyone who's doing work in fMRI.
Yeah, and I think, we actually see sometimes a lot of companies now that are new and small, and they're talking about using NIRS, but it's a very different technology. And I think that from the investor conversations that I've had with other later stage investors that are somewhat familiar with the space, I don't think it's very clear just how much engineering has gone into Kernel's time domain fNIRS technology, like the amount of mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, and also the form factor that you've built so that it's aesthetically comfortable and actually scalable for data collection. All of those things have taken time, and that's where the funding has gone. In terms of the actual output, what can a generalist investor expect in terms of temporal resolution and spatial resolution compared to the average NIRS technology?
Yeah, so we actually have a publication that we publication that got published earlier this year, as they tend to do, where we kind of looked at this side by side. So what does a traditional NIRS or CW NIRS resolution look like compared to the time domain NIRS? And what we showed is that, yes, you can see deeper, and you can localize the activations better. So you get better spatial resolution. And so our spatial resolution is on the order of centimeters. And the resolution of a optical-based system, whether it's traditional NIRS or time domain NIRS, is proportional also to the number of lasers and detectors that you have. So the more you have, the better your resolution can be. And so with our amount of coverage and density of sensors, we're able to get a couple centimeters of resolution. Most NIRS systems today that cost 10x more than what we're doing will struggle to get these like 1 to 2 centimeter resolutions, if at all, and definitely not over the whole head, because they just can't fit all the sources and detectors onto the head the way that we're able to.
Yeah, the miniaturization of the technology that you showed us before is pretty astounding. I think you were mentioning it went from like a huge stack of technology down to this one little transducer here.
Yeah, I can take one out.
Pull it out.
Yeah, so what I'm holding in my hand,
you just hold it toward you. Yeah, they're beautiful.
This module, this combination of 6 detectors and 3 lasers, when we started Kernel, would have filled almost an entire computer rack worth of measurement equipment to produce the functionality that's inside this module. So this module consumes about a watt of power, so it takes some power to operate the sensor. And when we started the typical, it's like 100 watt per channel type measurement. So we're talking about orders of magnitude reductions in power consumption, orders of magnitude reduction in sensor volume, right? Really big innovations that were needed in order to miniaturize the technology and actually make it something that you could use in practical settings.
Yeah, I was pretty shocked when you told me that. I think when we met a couple of years ago, I had no idea that really took so much effort, and it really made me appreciate what Kernel was doing a lot more. And I think around the time that you took over as CEO, I know that, again, from my conversations with other investors that are interested in Kernel, I think they know the story up until that point. They know, I guess, the vision that Bryan had and how much effort he put into really showcasing the potential of the technology. And I think I'd love to know, when you took over the seat of CEO, what the biggest challenges were in trying to address, okay, we've built this cool technology that can really, in an astounding way, measure the brain. Now, what do we do with it?
Yeah.
Like, what was the biggest challenge for you there?
I mean, one of the biggest challenges is that people tend to kind of gravitate to these spec-based comparisons, like we were just having this discussion of like spatial resolution and temporal resolution. Everyone wants to like say like, oh, well, what's the temporal and spatial resolution of your sensor, and why is this better than that? And we were always facing these questions. We were like, well, we're like fMRI, but not. We're like EEG, but not, and we're somewhere in the middle. And it was never really a clear answer of like why this technology was going to beat out everything else. And so when I was handed the responsibility of being CEO of the company and finding the way to kind of get this out in the world, the first thing I did was really try and change the conversation. So I didn't want to have conversations about spatial resolution and temporal resolution. What I wanted to do is abstract a layer up and say what we really care about is application performance. right? Like that's all anyone cares about at the end of the day. Can you decode the thoughts or language that you're trying to? Can you predict the treatment outcomes that you're trying to? Can you identify the patients with the disease that you're trying to find? And what accuracy can you do these things with? And so about 2 years ago, I set the company on a path to really show what we could do at the applications level. We had a few researchers that are doing some work on their own independently. We, sell systems and, work with them, support them to do their own fundamental research. But we needed something to show and explain to the investor and business community, like, why is our technology better and what can you do now that you couldn't do before? And that's really what we've done over the last 2 years is I think, answered those questions and shown what is, I would say we've just scratched the surface of what's possible really with a platform technology like what we've built.
Yeah, I mean,
go ahead.
I was going to say, it sounds like one of the challenges that maybe is a continuous challenge is, there are so many things that you can technically apply this to, and figuring out the balance between what is Kernel going to own versus what is Kernel going to partner on, I think will be an ever evolving challenge for any technology that is at the frontier of its own category. But I think this idea of building a platform and using the platform to most optimally respond to environmental catalysts, if you will. I think that's what I perceive Kernel to be doing right now. But I was going to cut you off. I'm sorry. What were you
Well, I was just going to ask, you talked about proving out what the platform can do and how it can be used at the application level. What are some of those things?
Yeah. Well, and, I take inspiration as biotech investors. I'm sure you've had these conversations many times with companies who are like, hey, we have this platform technology. And you're like, yes, what's your platform? I see your platform. What's your lead asset, right? You still need a lead.
What do we actually do with this thing? It's like the sensor counts are fantastic. What does it do? Yeah.
And so what we really did is we decided to focus on 2 areas. And we spent a lot of time debating what are the areas we want to go. We really wanted to find one, but at the end of the day, we're like, the incremental cost of pursuing 2 versus 1 is really small. So let's just go for 2. Mm-hmm. And those 2 areas broadly are depression and cognition. And I'll explain a little bit more about each and what we set out to show in those domains. So starting with depression, we talked to a lot of people, a lot of psychiatrists, people working in the space, insurers, and we're trying to understand what were the biggest needs in drug makers, what were the biggest needs in kind of the field of depression. And the thing we got an overwhelming feedback on was we don't need diagnostic help, right? Like don't build a diagnostic tool. As a clinician, I don't need help on that. Like we have.
When you say that, you mean determining if someone is depressed?
Yeah, right. Determining if someone is depressed and the extent to which they are depressed.
So they feel the MADRS surveys and things are sufficient. Basically, we don't need any tech to do that.
Yeah, as a clinician, right? They're not running clinical trials here, so they're not trying to say, oh, this is a 3-point. This isn't a compass pathways problem where you're trying to separate from placebo on like a few points. Really, it's just like, does this person have a clinical diagnosis, and should I be doing something to intervene? And so they say, don't do that. Instead, what we could really use help with is identifying the right treatment for the right patient. So treatment selection being an area of focus. And we said, okay, that's interesting. We could work with this. There are SSRIs, very broadly prescribed. It's very hard to do research in SSRIs as a company like ours, and I can explain why in a second. There's TMS, things that are neurostimulation, somewhat efficacious. There's ketamine, there's Spravato. And so kind of like look at this landscape and we're like, okay, let's start a study. We'll do it observationally and we'll recruit patients who are willing to share brain data with us as they're getting treatment. And we'll obviously compensate them and we'll work with the clinical staff and, we'll get clinical data to tie with the brain data and we can build out a predictive model that says, patient, are likely to respond to this treatment or not. And if you are likely to respond, we're 70% likely or 99% likely. And, that kind of was our objective.
And sorry to cut you off, but
go ahead.
So when you talk to these clinicians, how are they doing this currently before Kernel? Is it just a roll of the dice, or is it whichever's the cheapest option we'll try first? Like, do they have any sort of tool to help decide predicting who's going to respond to what, or is it pretty random?
It's everyone's favorite tool, intuition.
Okay.
Gotcha. Wow.
So, especially for frontline treatments, intuition is kind of what they use to drive. It's like, I've seen a patient like you before, and this worked for them. So let's try that first and see what happens.
So pattern matching using a human brain.
Yes.
I see. So just to kind of restate the problem here, ultimately what the problem is, most patients that are prescribed some kind of treatment for depression don't respond or remit, basically.
Right.
And so is essentially the problem that you were trying to solve, is it fair to say that you're trying to reduce that trial and error experience, reduce patient burden, but also there is some economic benefit to it as well for the clinicians?
Yes. And, we started out with this very broad goal. We'll look at SSRIs, we'll look at ketamine and Spravato and TMS. We narrowed it after a couple months working in this space to really focus on TMS and Spravato or S-ketamine. And that kind of shifted our focus away from MDD and first-line treatments to really treatment-resistant depression and patients who had tried things before and been failing. And so we saw this big opportunity where, and really unmet need, where there are patients who are not responding to treatment, and obviously no one knows exactly why. We saw some research in the academic sphere that suggested there are fMRI-based biomarkers that can help with predicting, and we're like, hey, we can kind of focus in on this. There's a little bit of a precedent. TMS and Spravato, they're third-line treatments. They're for patients who are treatment resistant. Insurance will pay for them. They're FDA approved. They're expensive, and remission rates still suck. Remission rate for standard TMS is around 50%.
Wow.
Remission rate for Spravato is in the 20% for treatment-resistant depression. And so there's a lot of money, tens of thousands of dollars that are spent on these patients, and outcomes aren't really that great. And so we said, hey, if we can use measurement to help match the right patient with the right treatment, we have a chance not only to save money in the health system, but also make big impact to patients' lives and getting them better, sometimes helping motivate treatment, hey, this is going to work for you. Just do it and try it, stick with it.
And so how did this study work in practice? Did they basically put the headset on, it takes a 10-minute reading, and then you end up waiting however many weeks after they start treatment and you kind of collect their response, and then that's how you build the data set?
Yeah, so we followed kind of industry norms here. So we looked at baseline measures of brain activity. It's about 30 minutes of measurement that we do at baseline. And then we would do a follow-up a week into treatment about. And then 6 weeks is kind of the evaluation period for a lot of treatments. And so they start to make decisions on, was the TMS effective at the end of the 6-week course? Was Spravato effective at the end of the 6-week course? And so we looked at these 3 time points. And to date, we've really focused all of our analysis on just that baseline data and the change in MADRS score, so the depressive scale from baseline to 6 weeks. And we've actually been able to train a model that predicts with close to 90% accuracy if a patient will respond to TMS or not, based on their baseline brain measurements alone. So looking just at their baseline brain measurements.
The X is baseline kernel scan, the Y is the change in MADRS score after 6 weeks.
Right.
And then the model, I have to ask the machine learning question. So the data that comes out of the helmet, it's basically like a video of your brain for 30 minutes, more or less. Is that the right way to think about it?
Yeah, it's like a course video of your brain. It's
1 frame per second video.
Almost 5 frames a second.
5 frames per second.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. I didn't mean to insult the kernel headset. And so is it I guess if I was approaching this problem, not knowing anything about it, it's like there's two options. One is I could basically throw like a black box neural network at it. Just here's the raw video, see if you can figure out how to match this to the mattress change. Or maybe by talking to some expert neuroscientists, they already have some way to identify features that they think correspond with things that we happen to know about how the brain works. So maybe like circuit A versus circuit B, default mode network, those types of things. Is it more that former black box approach, or is it more built on like some hand selected features that we've been able to extract based on all the prior neuroscience work that's been done, over the past 100 years?
Yeah, definitely the latter at today. And, part of the reason is we just don't have the volume of data.
True, you'd probably need thousands of people to do the black box.
That's needed to go into the black box. We'd love to get there and see what we uncover and discover over time. But what we found is we can do a lot of really useful things with relatively small data sets. So this TMS prediction we're able to do with around 50 patients worth of data to build the model and predict the outcomes. And so it's a proof of concept more than anything to show that it can be done. I didn't mention this, but these trials are run in interventional psychiatry practices today. So these are not, run in academic centers or in really controlled settings. These are run in the locations where the patients are already going and receiving treatment, and really showing that you can collect good enough data in real world settings to make these types of models and predictions. And I think
big
that's
advantage
really
of Kernel over like an MRI machine, because most interventional psychiatry clinics are not going to have a whole MRI room.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So given that the model somewhat has these, sort of human understandable features, are there any interesting things that kind of stand out in terms of what's predictive about why someone might respond that you're able to share? Or is that all top secret Kernel stuff?
I could lie and say it's top secret and I won't share it. But the truth is that you may have noted in Sam's intro that I'm an electrical engineer. So I actually don't know what the key features are.
Okay.
Yeah, you have to walk across the building and talk to some other folks to understand which of those things that they've found to be most impactful and surprising.
Yeah, it's a really important question though, because I think it kind of highlights some of the confusion again amongst generalists investors when I have these conversations, about volume versus quality in terms of data collection about the brain. And I will go so far as to say or ask, in addition to what Brom just said, or in reference to it, when we're talking about handpicking features that are in the literature to base, a study off of or a research project off of when it comes to the work that you're doing at Kernel, is it fair to say that a lot of this comes from the fMRI bold literature, like looking at neural correlates as they relate to disease states specifically, or is it just a bunch of other things as well? And I will follow up with a reason for asking that afterwards.
Yeah. Yes. So I mentioned also in the intro that we have a really fantastic team here at Kernel, and we're very critical in reading the literature that's out there and seeing what other people have done. And, for instance, Catherine Purdue, who leads our clinical research, she won't try anything unless other people have already replicated it. She won't try to recreate something someone else has done unless other people have replicated it. So no one-off studies where it's we saw this really cool thing and it was, this huge effect in 10 people. No, we want things that are robust. We're not going to invest our resources and stake the future of Kernel on something that's done by one lab, and that's the only lab that's ever been able to reproduce it. And so we bring a very systematic approach to using the literature and being inspired by it. So we don't start from scratch every time. We're not just out here shooting in the dark. We're systematic. We're thoughtful about how we approach each of these problems, and the way that we build our hypotheses to test with our studies. So we're a scientific, driven company. We're focused on generating evidence and showing people, what the sensor can do and what the evidence shows. We're open. We publish. Yeah. You mentioned, I think we have 6 publications now, and the reason we publish is because we want people to know that there is something real and solid and scientific behind what we're doing.
Yeah, I think it's a great advantage that there is the like specifically the neural correlate literature to turn to, because it helps guide decision making for sure. But I also think that ultimately, and I'm not a neuroscientist, so I can't answer this in detail, but ultimately I think it's one of the reasons why you don't need to collect so much data, right? I've heard many people talk about how, they have a 10,000 person data set of EEG, but it's like, well, what is the actual signal that's being measured? What is the signal to noise ratio? Is this relevant in the grand scheme of things? And I feel like the literature that exists based on like fMRI Bold really support that and strengthen it for Kernel in terms of using it as a springboard for where to go. Whereas with EEG, I know there's a bunch of literature there, but I struggle to really understand how volume always equals good in that context. Like, what do you think about that generally?
I mean, it's... it I think comes back to things like your signal to noise ratio and how you are able to measure the underlying information. Like we think about information and not just data or signal. It's really how much information can you capture. And the other thing that we have going for us is because we have such density of measurements. So we get over 3,000 measurement points across the head. So, high density EEG is like 128 or some like really high density, ultra high density or like 1,000 channel EEG systems. We get 3,000 measurement points on the brain 5 times a second. And so we get this really nice spatial resolution. And that allows us to do some really neat things. So, in addition to this discussion between like, should it be EEG and, 10,000 or 100,000 person data sets or something like fNIRS with the smaller data set, you also have a choice to make between what I would call task-free or resting state measurements, where you just let the brain kind of wander into its natural default state, and task-based measures, where you can kind of drive the brain into an expected state and then look for variations between those expected states. And so we do a combination of these things because they each offer some useful insights, right? This task-free one, the task-free approach really sets us up for measurements that generalize well across many conditions and populations and groups. And so our BrainAge work that we do, for instance, is all based on a task-free measurement. So we're looking at the functional age of the brain without driving it into a specifically known state.
Mm-hmm. Just to be clear, when you say task-free, you mean like you basically just put the headset on and you don't ask the person to do anything, right? Like there's no task that they're given? Okay.
We're not asking you to do anything. We're not asking you to engage. So we actually have these neat little videos that we've made that you just watch, and they're kind of abstract, and they play a sound, and
just some to make sure everyone's getting the same input, basically.
It's even less about making sure the input is exactly the same, and more about just making sure that you're not like in a emotionally aroused state of any kind.
Got it.
Right. And so it's trying to keep you as neutral as possible and awake, right? Because that's the other risk you run. If you keep people task free, you don't ask them to do anything for 10 minutes and you just sit there, everyone's a little sleep deprived, and you come back and they're just like snoring at the desk with a heavy headset on.
Problem.
So that's what I mean by task free. And what's really nice about that is because you're not asking them to do anything, again, it generalizes well. So you can look across conditions, across disease states, across ages. The task-based measures, we typically tune based on what we're trying to study. So we add something general, right, the task-free, with something specific, the task-based measure. So, in our depression work we were just talking about, we use tasks that evoke emotional responses or require some processing of emotional information. And so we know what the brain should do to respond to that emotional information, and we can see if your brain is doing that or not. And the extent to which it does it tells us something about in this case, the probability you'll respond to treatment in these specific treatments. Mm-hmm. And so I think that is another kind of bringing it back to your question. It's another important consideration in how much data you need in order to see what you're looking for. If all you do is the task-free kind of condition, you have to collect enough data to understand like what are the individual differences and the things that you need to pick up on in order to tease apart the the information you're looking for. Whereas if you use the task-based, you can kind of drive a lot of the noise and variation away and focus in on some like more tailored things to what information you're trying to get at, which, again, using the example would be, will this person respond to treatment?
Right. And so, you mentioned the PREDICT study, which is the clinical study that you conducted in trying to predict treatment response. That was one area of focus. Yep. And you explaining task-free and task-based measures, it made me think about the work that Kernel has done in cognition as well. So can you talk a little bit about the IMPACT study?
Yeah, so IMPACT was, again, a combination of task-free and task-based measures. And here, what we did is we set out, again, this is proof of concept, so sample size is our proof of concept size, but we wanted to measure 50 patients who had a known diagnosis of mild cognitive impairment and compare them to 50 age and sex matched healthy controls. So trying to remove age and sex differences and just compare based on what the brain is doing in the case of someone who has a diagnosis of MCI, mild cognitive impairment, or a healthy person. And this is work we finished last October, submitted for publication. It has been accepted and will be out in the world hopefully by the time of this podcast. These publishing groups, they just drag their feet even after you pay them the money. They thousands of dollars. Here you go, but then
nothing.
Yeah, come on, publish. And so what we showed in this case is that again, close to 90% accuracy, we could identify the patients who have MCI based on this brain data. Versus those who are healthy.
That is huge. I want to put this into context for those
why
listening.
That's important and exciting.
How long does it take the average neurologist to diagnose MCI and how long did it take for you to do the reading?
Yeah, and so I just want to be clear, this is not a diagnostic. This is a research study, typically a diagnosis of MCI is made after a lot of exclusionary testing. So the neurologists and neuropsychologists will do a lot of tests. So both cognitive tests and other things like MRI, maybe to rule out trauma or other like injuries to the brain. But it's a relatively long process in order to get to a diagnosis of MCI with any kind of definitive answer. And our study, again, we did 30 minutes of brain measurement and collected some behavioral data, and we're able to get to, and I'll say this just for clarity, we used clinicians' assessment as the endpoint, like what we were comparing in the model or trying to train against. And the reason we did this is because the clinician is synthesizing all of this information into a diagnosis of MCI. We did not use a single score like MMSE or the activities of daily living because we wanted to really see how we would perform against what's done in like real world clinical use case. This wasn't a pharma specific research study where we're trying to say, you could use us instead of MMSE. That wasn't the goal of this. It was really to show that we could pick up on information that relates to what the clinician is seeing through all the testing and all the interactions that they have with that patient.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I was going to ask, so I understand why it's important to predict if someone is going to respond to some sort of depression treatment or not, but what is the impact of being able to diagnose mild cognitive impairment?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think I'm gonna bring this back to the human three
please.
Concepts, right? And
Put it in our terms.
So you, as investors in human three, want to invest in companies who can, have distribution shifting potential, right? They're developing interventions or treatments that can move patients from, a sick state into a healthy state or a healthy state into a super healthy or optimized state. And in the context of cognition, mild cognitive impairment is kind of at this transition on the left side between sick and healthy. It's the first signs that there's something going on with your cognition and you need more, some kind of follow-up care or monitoring or maybe eventually treatment.
And is this generally just basically the Alzheimer's precursor, or are there other things that it could lead to other than Alzheimer's?
Yeah, so MCI can be a sign of many indications. Like you can have mild cognitive impairment due to a traumatic brain injury. You can have mild cognitive impairment because of Alzheimer's or Lewy body dementia or frontotemporal dementia. So there are a wide range of underlying diseases, pathologies, traumas that could cause mild cognitive impairment. But this is just kind of a demonstration that you can measure some signatures that relate to mild cognitive impairment. And so what we've actually done since the MCI proof of concept study is we zoomed out a little bit and we said, we don't care necessarily about predicting if someone has MCI or not. What we really care about, and this is back to human 3, is can we quantify where someone falls in the spectrum between disease and optimized in terms of cognition. And we've been doing this work now. We finished earlier this spring a 250-person healthy study where we're just collecting people's brain activity in a number of cognitive, task-based cognitive tests and combining that with, again, task-free cognitive measures in order to quantify 5 of the 6 DSM-5 cognitive domains. So these are the same cognitive domains that are used to assess if someone has cognitive impairment. But now we can quantify them and tell you for your age, are you in the 10th percentile or the 90th percentile in each of these domains? And we think this is really powerful because with just 30 minutes now, you can see where in this distribution you fall. And then you can decide, are you going to go after enhancement, right? Are you trying to push yourself up and be peak performance? Do you want to be special forces cognitive capable? Or are you kind of in this borderline disease state and you need to start thinking about some real lifestyle modifications to prevent getting worse? And so we know that cognition can be maintained, improved, decline can be prevented through lifestyle interventions, diet, sleep, exercise, these things. Bryan talks about sleep all the time, like sleep, be a professional sleeper, and that's the number one goal or number one intervention for longevity. And he's not the only one, right? Like there are plenty of people that will tell you there are these lifestyle things that you can do. And so I think having a tool that can measure, tell you where you fall in that distribution, and give you some guidance eventually of how to move more toward the right through hopefully some of your portfolio companies who are building great products. We can actually track and show how people are going to move.
I think what's so cool about it to me is that with many of the other like biomarkers that a lot of these longevity companies are pushing, I feel like in some cases they're kind of redundant because oftentimes my general belief is like if you're pretty physically unhealthy, you kind of know it, even if you don't get a blood test or whatever. Like if you're seriously out of shape and overweight, you don't even need to step on a scale to know. You just look in the mirror, right? It's very easy. But with something like cognitive impairment, I feel like it kind of it creeps up on you over a number of years. And the current status quo is that unless you go to a physician and say, hey, can you please assess me for cognitive impairment? I'm feeling X, Y, and Z. There's no way you're ever going to get that test done other than maybe like a loved one or something like forcing you to go and get checked out, right? But if the paradigm shifts to, just as part of your yearly physical, you put the kernel on for 30 minutes and we measure all these things, you might be able to catch, hey, your cognition slipped way more than it should have over the past year. Like maybe something is going on and you could probably catch a lot of stuff pretty early, which I think is neat.
This is great. It's cognitive pace of aging,
right?
Right. Like if you kind of think about something.
Normally every year it goes down by X, but you actually went down by 5X. So like what's going on?
Yeah. Exactly. And I think it's a thing that's there and we just haven't had the tools to do it.
Because the sort of traditional cognitive impairment testing, we didn't talk about it, but I mean, you have to sit there with a trained assessor for a number of hours and they play all these little games with you and stuff, right? It's not like some quick and easy thing. So
right. And they often have pretty bad ceiling effects. So if you're a healthy 40-year-old, you're probably going to max out on the score, right? And you'll continue to max out until something starts to go wrong, and then you'll see this behavioral shift in performance. And so when I talk about this, I always highlight the difference between what we're measuring and what is typically measured today. So today, it's primarily performance that is being measured. How well can you perform on a test? Right? We've all been through this. Like we've taken our SATs and GREs and every standardized test around. Like we go through life focused on performance. And, you get the highest score on the SAT, but, did you work as hard as someone else to get it? I don't know. Maybe not.
Right.
Maybe you're just
effect,
gifted.
Yeah.
There's a ceiling effect on the score. And so what we're doing, in addition to seeing the performance, is we're measuring the function. What is your brain doing at the same time that you're performing at this level? And if there's a big difference in what we expect here, we can use that to help identify where in this distribution you really fall. So even though you may be healthy, you could be healthy on the wrong side of that distribution.
Right.
And you would want to know that.
You would.
Right.
You would.
I'm personally very obsessed with this idea. I think it is like the ultimate personification and I guess manifestation of human 3, because, right now on the disease state side, one of the biggest areas of unmet need in therapeutics is neuroscience across the board. I mean, I can't underscore the importance of early diagnosis, early detection for things like neurodegenerative disease, but also accuracy in predicting, let's say, how you're going to progress with a psychiatric illness. The DSM, we could talk about that. It's very flawed. But I think, we've developed interventions for many other areas that are going to keep our bodies healthy for longer. A lot of people are thinking more about their health. A lot of people aren't drinking alcohol anymore. So technically, our bodies are going to live longer. But if we don't find ways and find tools like this to better understand how we can intervene early, whether that be through our lifestyle or through therapeutics, we're not going to have the brain that we want as our body ages until we're 120, 130 years old. So on the disease state side of things, I believe there's a strong sense of urgency there to implement this on the biopharma side, which is some of the work that we do together. But even on the healthy side, we're living in this age of AI now where people are worried about their jobs being taken and wanting to perform and integrate with AI. And I think this could be technically a tool that can help gauge how to best do that as well. So, true in its truest sense, a very human 3 technology. Yeah.
And I think, Ryan, you were going to sort of show us an example of what these measurements actually look like. Could you walk us through that on your own brain?
Yeah. So I'm in a very fortunate position working at Kernel. I can get my brain measured as often as I'd like. And so I regularly do BrainAge measurements, which are these task-free. I just watch the video for about 7 minutes. My data goes up to our cloud platform. It crunches through and it spits out what my BrainAge is on that day. And I can track it over time. I've got this nice chart here on my phone. You can see this is our little web app that we've built. And I have a BrainAge that's, pretty consistent around 36 or so. I'm 40, almost 41 now, and my BrainAge hovers around 36, 37 in normal conditions. I've done some things like travel and then measure my BrainAge, so like travel to Europe and back, and you can see the impact it has, the acute impact it has on the way your brain is functioning, and I think it's really interesting just to be able to see kind of what is normal baseline and
right.
What are the things that you do, that make you move away from normal baseline. And those things could be good, like exercise. I've done this test again, N=1 studies, not scientifically rigorous. So don't expect a publication from me anytime on this soon, but, just kind of playing around with this tool because it exists now. You can see that, exercise actually, cause my BrainAge to go younger. Like it's good for your brain. And alcohol. Like I've done this, spent
and the morning hangover reading and something like that.
I did the evening barely together enough to get the headset on and take the measurement reading
during the intoxication.
Yeah,
okay.
just to see. It was all for science.
Right.
And it can see that it actually causes a shift in older BrainAge. And so you have this tool now where you can see what your choices, do to your brain function. And
I'd be so interested to see what it does while you're scrolling TikTok or doom scrolling some stupid social media app.
Hey,
seems like a relatively easy thing to do to try.
Brom, hang out as long as you want.
All right, maybe we'll do it this afternoon. And this is something that you guys are currently offering, right? If people are in the LA area, they can come and do this.
Yeah, so we are currently offering it here. So we've invited the public in to Kernel. For anyone who wants to get measured, you can come by. Actually don't come by, sign up on the
Sign up
website.
first, do not show up.
Yeah, don't show up at the door until you've signed up for a time slot. We also have a few longevity clinic partners who are starting to offer this. So it's launching in San Francisco Bay Area later, I think this week, actually.
What's the name of the clinic?
Longevity Health.
Longevity Health. Okay.
And so we'll post all this on our website because this podcast will go live
the next 2 weeks or something.
Yeah, so I shouldn't use relative reference points because who knows. So we have one in the SF Bay area. Gillette, Wyoming is signed up to be a clinic.
Gillette, Wyoming. Huh?
Yeah, they have a whole big. It's actually quite a nice facility. You should check it out if you're interested. They have tons of crazy tech there. Pittsburgh is going to be a site, Columbus, Ohio, a site. So
do you have a URL where people can see the full list of locations?
You can go to kernel.com/BrainAge, and all the information is there. You can sign up to get notified whenever a location comes on in your near your zip code, so you don't have to check back all the time. There's a little newsletter sign up if you're curious, and you can always submit a little note to us and tell us what you think or if you have questions. So
very cool.
Yeah. I have two more things that I want to talk about. I mean, I mentioned at the beginning the platform idea. And so I have a few questions about Kernel's customer base and the business and how it evolves over time. But before that, I want to talk about the scientific standards in neurotech because, we're talking about all of the, different types of ways to measure the brain. And, people can come and get a BrainAge reading, as we were just discussing, whenever they want, if they sign up. But there's also a lot of headsets that are commercially available for consumers to just buy. And, I think you were on the paper with Jacob Robinson and Sumner, building up this new ontology of what it means to be a brain-computer interface and what is the difference between invasive and non-invasive. And we alluded to that earlier. So with that in mind, or maybe riffing on it, how do you think about this new wave of neuro AI companies and non-invasive companies that are more consumer-facing versus what Kernel has?
Okay, there are a lot of things kind of packed in there. So first, the BCI taxonomy, right? Sumner and Jacob did a great job leading that effort. And I'm a strong believer in precision of language and using precise language to describe what it is you're doing. And I feel like that taxonomy really provided the framework to enable everyone to be precise about what type of say neurotech or BCI you're building. And I know there's been a bit of debate and some controversy over people who feel like the BCI term had been stolen away from their group and, reassigned to new meanings. And, but I don't think that was the intent at all. I think the intent was really that there are a lot of people coming into this space now. And so as, investors and business people are coming in, they need to have a clear way to understand what it is we're talking about. And if everything's a BCI, then nothing should be a BCI, right? You need to have a way to distinguish between things, right? Mm-hmm. And I know the invasive or implantable BCI group, IBCI, has done a good job at bringing industry leaders together and having these discussions and making sure they have some alignment on some of their endpoints and strategies and things. And so I think it's good for the field overall to be clear about the language that we're using to describe what it is we do. And so I don't know if anything more needs to be said on that, but
I think maybe more investors need to consult that document is what I say.
I think it's great. And ask the question. It's tell me, what type of BCI are you? Right? Because, we're all building things that connect brains to computers. And we're connecting brains to computers to do different things, right? I talked about the way we're trying to predict treatment response and help get patients better. There are people connecting brains to computers to control cursors, people connecting brains to computers to decode language and, decode thought. And so I think just ask the question to know what it is you're talking about and don't be shy. And the founders and companies, they ought to have good answers to this. So
there's this is maybe a bit of a non sequitur, but there are these SEO tools that you can use to see what people search for that drives them to a website. And I looked up for Neuralink, because they have like probably the most mind share out of any like BCI company. Like the first search term was Neuralink. The second term was BCI. Neurotech was not on the top 100. Like I feel like neurotech is a very bubble, like, sort of in-group term that no one outside knows.
Definitely.
Yeah,
Definitely. I think so. So, I mean, my takeaway from that was, yes, we should delineate between invasive and non-invasive. But on the non-invasive side specifically, investors, listen to this, please. There is a difference between something that is reading and collecting data and like also claiming to stimulate and provide therapeutic treatment. Right. And I think that has been in some conversations lumped together erroneously. But I guess the follow-on question that I was trying to get to was, what do you think of the sheer amount of non-invasive consumer-facing companies that claim to be able to read or stimulate the brain?
Yeah. So there are a lot of companies out there, and you also mentioned scientific standards. And I obviously can talk a lot. I get on my soapbox and really, share my thoughts on scientific standards and rigor. And, I think part of the reason that Kernel takes such a scientifically rigorous and evidence-based approach is because of its founding story and the nature, right, through which we were founded. Bryan Johnson founded this not as a technical expert with deep neuroscience background and these biases that I discussed before. And so we had to prove to everyone through evidence that what we were building and the engineering we were doing was real. And it was kind of out of necessity that we took a very scientifically rigorous approach to show that, sure, we didn't spin out of an academic lab, but that doesn't mean we're a bunch of clowns just building, building technology to build it. Like, we know what we're doing, and here's the proof. And I think there are a lot of companies that are spun out of academic labs that don't do a good job of building the evidence and the proof behind what it is that they're actually building, or like trying to commercialize. And so if, a company is saying, oh, we're evidence-backed, look for publications by that company, right? Like the work that they've done with their product or their technology stack that they've built, not the stuff that was done at their academic institute before they left and spun out the company, right? Like, I think you really need to focus on the evidence that's been generated around the product that they think they're going to sell and commercialize. And because EEG has been around for so long, I think there are many companies that are bad players in the space where lines get blurred between what it is they've actually done, what data they've actually collected versus open source databases that they just pulled in that everyone else has access to. Yeah, and so you really want to ask these questions, find out where the data came from, who reviewed it, where it's published. I'll say we put things on bioRxiv and medRxiv all the time as preprints. If it's on one of these archive sites, it has not been peer reviewed, right? Yeah. That is not a vote that this is scientifically rigorous, scientifically accepted evidence. It just means that I have a publication and it's in review somewhere, maybe even. And so, make sure that those companies who share links on, bioRxiv, medRxiv, whatever it is, you follow through with them and find out where it gets published, and, see the actual final peer-reviewed product. We put it out there because you get early access. You can see what we've been doing, and we want people to see what we've been doing, but you can see our track record also. Every single thing that's gone on bioRxiv or medRxiv that Kernel put up there has been published in a peer-reviewed journal to date. So we're not just putting crappy work up on a preprint server and trying to convince people that we've done something. We haven't. So ask deep questions, poke, prod, find out the source of the data, look for scientific work that's been done at the company with their data, with their team, with their tools, because that's the evidence that you really need to build a product.
Yeah, I'm part of a working group. I'm co-leading this working group at a nonprofit on how to provide leading questions for investors that promote neuroethics. And to me, part of neuroethics is having scientific standards, having a rigorous approach to the claims that you're making. Even if you're not following the medicalization pathway for a diagnostic or a tool that's going to be FDA approved, I think the industry needs to self-standardize to some degree. And I do think that Kernel is leading that and setting that precedent. So I'm very happy about it.
Yeah, I agree. I think like even if it's not medical, you should still have some evidence. And I know they're going to be because there are so many EEG companies and EEG is so ubiquitous. There are going to be so many people who say like, "Oh, it's a trade secret. Or that's our proprietary thing. We don't want to publish it." But I think that's up to you as an investor or potential customer or partner to really ask the tough questions. We've found a way to publish key methodology and things that show what we do is robust and real without revealing all of our inner secrets. And so I think everyone can do that too. There's a line.
If there's substance there, then you can do that. That's a good qualifying question.
On the subject of consumer stuff, I mean, it's fun to poke fun at the folks that are making these kind of cheap devices and everything, but there is some theoretical benefit to making devices that are inexpensive enough for people to have them in their own home. Because I mean, you kind of mentioned it's great that you're able to do the BrainAge, once a week or however often, whereas a normal person probably maybe a few times a year at most. Do you think it's possible, given all of the intense work that has gone into this headset? Could you make like a consumer grade version that is maybe 1/10 as powerful, but still way better than the cheap EEG headband that someone might buy off of Amazon that people could get for $1,000 or something, rather than the what $50,000 that the headset costs?
Yeah, we sell it for almost 120,000.
All right, 120,000. I was off.
Yeah,
use discount code Brom for
that. Yes, it's funny to see the reactions of people in airport security when they ask me what this is, and I tell them, "Oh, it's a new technology we built for measuring the brain." They're like, "Oh, wow, is that expensive?" I was like, "Yeah, it's a little over $100,000," and they're like, whose responsibility is this if this gets lost or stolen?
That's why I'm carrying it on, sir. I'm not checking this.
Yeah, and it's just like such a wide range of like interesting questions that come out of airport security. So yes, it's expensive, far too expensive for the ordinary consumer to own today. I would much rather see a scenario where this is offered within kind of corporate workspaces as a shared resource where people could come in, right? Like, I mean, we actually do it here. We have a room dedicated with set hours where our employees can go and measure their brain as often as they want. It's a perk of working at Kernel. And, other employers could offer similar perks where, you can come in and get BrainAge measured and just track yourself over time as often as you want. At least today, that's kind of, a way to realize the vision and, to satisfy the jealousy that others may have of my ability to measure my brain with high frequency. But, long term, yes, I see a world in which we can reduce the form factor, kind of tailor this down to something that, I wouldn't say $1,000, but, Apple Vision Pro price tag-ish, a couple $1,000s.
Something that a very enthusiastic, not super wealthy individual, but high earner could reasonably afford.
Yeah, right. And, I think at the end of the day, the only way you sell devices in that price point is if you can provide enough value to that end user. And, some people, let's say $3,000, spread that over a period of 3-4 years, right? That's, tens of dollars a month to be able to measure your brain and monitor it. And, I'm not saying you need to upgrade your device every 3 or 4 years, right? You could probably use this for, a decade solid. But the key is really like, how valuable is it to you? What is the preventative, like the value in preventing the onset of some of these conditions? What does that mean to you? And, we talk a lot about cognition, but I also believe very strongly that there are plenty of people with subclinical, mental illness, right? Like things that have not yet tripped, a full-on depressive episode or psychotic episode, and the ability to monitor your brain over time. And this is not what we're doing today. We're not, we have no claims around doing this, but the ability to kind of measure one's brain, I think, could really be game changing in managing some of these chronic illnesses and diseases that people struggle with, honestly, today. Like medicating some of these chronic illnesses is really hard. I mean, I've seen it firsthand.
If you can get a heads up when someone's about to go into a manic episode or something, like all that can be.
Yeah, really, I mean, we were talking about Kanye earlier, so
right. The other thing that I think could be very interesting, and I tried to pitch a variation of this to the hedge fund that I worked at like 8 years ago, and I've seen a few people pitch variations on it now, but during the working hours, having some probably low fidelity measurement of brain state, and based on that, picking between, out of the 5 tasks I have to do today, which one is my brain most receptive to, or like which type of task is my current brain state going to be the best for, and just surfacing that one.
And it always tells you to take a nap.
That's right. Yeah. It's funny. It always does. Interestingly.
But yeah, I mean, I think this is this kind of goes to that like cognitive domains thing, where if there is some sensitivity to day-to-day variations or acute factors, you may want to choose based on which of your domains is most optimal or normal right now.
Exactly. There are a number of people, especially in the Bay Area, that seem to think that if we can image enough brains and learn enough about how the brain works, we're going to be able to use those insights to design better AI models that are different AI architectures that might replace the like transformer LLMs that power Claude and ChatGPT. Do you think there's anything to that, or do you think that's just something that sounds cool when you say it?
I mean, it definitely sounds cool when you say it. And I will say that is outside my core area of expertise.
I know, but you're a guy that measures brains all day, so I thought you might have something.
Yes, and so it's outside my core area of expertise, but anyone who wants to try, call me.
Okay.
I've got plenty of devices I can sell you, and I'd be happy to support those data collection efforts, because to do that, I think you're going to need massive data sets, right? Especially when you start to think about the number of hours of brains you need to measure to kind of understand the architecture of information and how it's moved throughout the brain, and it responds to so many different stimuli, right? Like these models today aren't just text-based, right? They're multimodal, and like being able to understand how our brains handle all this information, synthesize it, and then react, I think it's going to be a big problem. And I'd be, MRI is not going to be your solution. That just costs will be way too high.
You really would need to basically measure people while doing all sorts of tasks and having all sorts of visual and auditory inputs simultaneously.
This is probably a really good opportunity to, again, for those listening, delineate between building a new machine learning architecture and also building something that's clinically useful or useful for customers. Because
this is sort of not really customer facing. This is
that's
like,
what I'm
can
saying.
We make a new?
No, but there's tons of companies and tons of investors that are getting excited when a real young startup pitches this idea of being able to collect like 7 modes of data to build this new model. And I have issue with it because personally, like look at the amount of effort that it's taken to optimize around fNIRS and get to the state of like amazing rigor and data collection. To be able to do that across many modes and also integrate them, I think you are going to fail before you succeed if you try to do more at once. You need to kind of, I have no empirical evidence for this other than my gut, but it is very hard for me to understand. So I'll be a little less conservative than you in your response and just say I'm very skeptical about it. And I know that a lot of people are excited about it. However, I think, Kernel's a good company to talk to if you're trying to do that. So for sure. But,
I would say if you want to try that, your best bet is using some kernel in there.
Yeah.
And I 100% agree with you with all really big impossibly hard problems, the best way to approach them is layered. I'm an engineer. I love layering problems. So you build a foundation before you start to build a structure. And I think, as long as you kind of approach it systematically and know what you're getting into and getting after, then you're likely to succeed. But, I'm happy to support anyone who wants to try. It's not an area that Kernel's going to point today as like trying to build a new AI model based on brain data. But we have the technology if people want to try it.
And the team and the infrastructure and the experience doing it. I'm a pretty big skeptic here, but I'm also willing to be proven wrong. Speaking of value that you're bringing to different customers and all these use cases, who are Kernel's customers?
Yeah, that's great. So we do have customers. So we are not a pre-revenue company. We are on a good path for revenue growth this year also. And we primarily sell into what I consider a research market. And so it's a pretty broad research market. And those researchers include universities. So we have dozens of universities now that have bought and are using our headsets for their own fundamental research. Areas where either fMRI or EEG can't perform, or they just needed something a bit more scalable, cheaper. We had one university buy 2 of them, and they said we just can't get enough time on the MRI scanner to do the work we want to do. So we'll take 2. So everyone should buy them in units of 2 also.
There's a Costco 4-pack also.
Yeah, you can get that.
Kirkland, Kernel.
There's a Kirkland 12-pack, Brom. You get a whole pallet at once. So universities are one. We also have some startups. So there are, I was being careful before because we do have customers who are building AI models, whether for decoding. I don't know that any of them are trying to build new, advanced AI architectures or LLMs, but they are doing decoding work and decoding language and thought and other things. And so we have probably a half dozen now startups, so young companies, big ideas who see that they need more advanced technology than they had access to. They all start with EEG. They get the headbands, spend a couple $1,000s, see what they can get with that, and then they call me up and say, "Hey, we've tried this stuff with EEG, but we really want to, take it to the next level. We're not seeing the performance we thought we'd see. How do we get one of your headsets?" And so, we have about half dozen customers there. We have corporates building consumer products. So these are big, multi-tens of billion-dollar multinational companies. I want to build a new energy drink so that Brom doesn't crash at the end of his podcasts, and want to see what this thing does in the brain and what the brain profile of it is. This is a hypothetical example that these types of corporate partners are trying to answer, and so they're doing research with our headsets today in order to try and get there. And then finally, we have pharma partners, so folks who are trying to study what happens in the brain when someone tries or is administered a novel drug. And this is interesting because they've long used EEG. There's been a shift kind of recently. There's been some great work in neuropsychiatric drugs and fMRI. But fMRI doesn't scale the way that pharma needs it to scale to use in trials. And so we're kind of sliding into that fMRI slot for pharma companies, looking at measuring the effect of a drug on the brain. And obviously that's the start. Where we're pointing at is being able to do what we're doing in depression, but more broadly in neuropsychiatric drug development, which is identify the patients who are likely to respond to a new drug based on their patterns of brain activity. And we're just kind of getting started in the space, but I see a lot of potential for changing the way not only drugs are developed, but the way that they're eventually distributed and marketed to individuals. So people will start to expect that they get a measurement with their neuro drug rather than here's a drug, let's see how it works in a few weeks and come back. And one of my favorite kind of test cases in the market on this is Alto Neuroscience, which I'm sure you guys are familiar with. Like they're trying to be they are, I would say, trailblazers in this way of bringing EEG measurement into the development and administration of drugs, with a goal of selecting patients based on their EEG signals, and then making sure they get the right drug at the right time. And I'm very optimistic that Alto will succeed at least to some level with their EEG biomarker. And then I like to paint this picture for everyone. All these investors in the biotech space who want to invest in companies doing something similar is that if every biotech company makes its own EEG device, its own interface, its own little tablet, and everything the way that Alto has, can you imagine going to the psychiatrist's office? They say, like, come on in. We're going to try this headset and interface on you first, and then we'll just go through them until we find one that works. No, that's not going to be the future. What's going to be the future is something like Kernel, which is this more universal, broad platform. Use a single test. Use that single test to identify which of the treatments is most likely to respond. So you can't just develop these things in isolation. And this is a big reason that we've started doing the TMS and Spravato work that we did. I should mention, we aren't running this directly, but there is some psilocybin work going on as well, right? Like if psilocybin is the first psychedelic approved for the treatment of major depressive disorder, say COMP360, your guys' recent podcast, then now you've got a longer menu of options to give people. And how do you decide who's getting what? Who gets Spravato, who gets TMS, who gets ECT, and who gets psilocybin? And do you just listen to the patient preference and hope it works? Or do you want to use data to identify the right one? And so we're really trying to set a precedent, not only in our own work, we're building our biomarkers to predict, but also through partnering with companies who are developing new treatments early on, so that as they go through the pipeline, they're already built on our platform and we'll be able to plug into that framework. That's the future we see.
Yeah, it makes total sense, especially as more and more of these novel treatments get developed. It becomes increasingly important to have a way to figure out which one's going to be right for you, because you don't want to just be trying a bunch of stuff and seeing what's
Beckley had Beckley had the 5-MeO,
DMT,
GH Research,
right,
huge effect sizes there. Gilgamesh had a recent positive phase 2, right? So many fast-acting antidepressants. And none of them universally work. No one has had 100% efficacy rate yet, which I think Gilgamesh was pretty close. Theirs was like in the high 90s or something. It was high. But obviously that's phase 2, need to do the phase 3, get more data, et cetera, et cetera. But it's not going to be a one size fits all solution, I think.
Yeah, even with psychedelics that, in theory, the mechanism of action is all sort of like similar between all of them. And if you look at like the 6-week MADRS differential between active and placebo, it seems like they all kind of hover around like 3, 4, 5. I suspect that if you had sort of a precision selection process, you could probably get a much higher efficacy if you were able to figure out who was going to get that higher efficacy. I would suspect.
I think there are a couple of things there that lead to that kind of group level compression of the MADRS difference. But yeah, if you look within the data on an individual level, I'm sure there are people that have changes in MADRS that are 10, 15, 20 points, and others that are single digits. And because it's averaged together, they all smush together. So if you can separate out those like super responders from those like minimal responders, then you've got something there. If you can also focus on the placebo arm to figure out who's driving the placebo effect and why, right? Like, is that
that's actually that's a pretty fascinating line of inquiry, and we've talked about that before. Sam, have you guys done any work on just seeing who is susceptible to the placebo effect based on their brain scan?
No. But there are some signs in like the work we've done on alcohol that there are. So I think in one of the supplemental figures in the scientific reports paper. This has been a couple years now, so don't quote me on it exactly. But what I recall is that, so this alcohol study, what we did is we let people choose if they wanted orange juice or cranberry juice. So I have a 3-year-old, and everyone loves, including 3-year-olds. You give them a choice. You say, you want this or this. But if you say, like, you're having this, people maybe don't love it. So I'm always giving my 3-year-old choices. Do you want mommy to do this or daddy? But you're doing this no matter what. Right. So these people had signed up. We let them choose if they want orange juice or cranberry juice. And then we either put no vodka in, and Tito's was the vodka of choice. During the study, we tested several to figure out which one was the best to blend, so you couldn't tell. So no alcohol, enough alcohol for your sex and weight to get you to a 0.04 BAC, or enough alcohol for your sex and weight to get you to a 0.08 BAC. So we pushed all the way up to the legal limit of driving in the US. And then we sprayed I think it was sprayed a paper towel around the rim of the cup so it smelled like vodka. So everyone had something to try and prevent them from identifying what the drink was. And then we asked people how much alcohol they thought they got in the drink and did the measurements and everything. And what was really interesting is we found that people who thought that they received alcohol but didn't receive alcohol, so placebo, they had a different pattern of brain activity than the ones who thought they didn't receive alcohol and didn't receive it.
This pre-brain active, like the baseline measurement?
No, this was
afterwards.
After.
Okay,
yeah.
Interesting.
That is interesting.
And so this was like the first sign that we saw something was there. But, again, as Sam mentioned earlier, the beauty of measuring the brain is you can measure so many different things and spend tons of time collecting data and, a whole career pursuing a single avenue. And we just haven't pushed that further, because we haven't had someone who wanted it, right? No customer that's like, hey, build this with us and we'll use it and it's going to change the game in clinical trials. So if that customer is listening, you know how to find me.
Yeah. I mean, this is why I'm excited about the business element of what Kernel is doing as a brain data platform. I talked a little bit about how I'm not excited about these neuro AI startups that are trying to collect all this data. But what I am excited about is the fact that they may be starting with flow and actually being able to capture a lot of meaningful data and hone in on a specific use case that is actually very practical and applicable and useful for consumers and patients. And so if you're starting with an exploratory effort that is guided in partnership with the Kernel team towards something that could translate into something commercializable, it's kind of like spreading the tentacles of the original vision where, you looked at the vision of what this could possibly do and possibly measure, but ultimately over time you figure out what it's most useful for.
Yeah.
So that's great.
Yeah, and the flip side of that is if anyone wants to write me $1 billion check, I will hire the team and do all these things.
Yes.
But absent of giant windfall, we'll continue to kind of focus in on what we see as the highest value opportunities for right now and where we can try and skate to where the puck's going in areas like cognition, both healthy and disease, and depression, and treatment response prediction, and this whole expanding menu of options for fast-acting antidepressants.
That's great. Is there anything that you want to share with those that are listening, which we haven't talked about already?
I feel like I've shared my entire life story with you guys over the last bit. So, I just say that, working at Kernel, I've been here for 7 years now, and it has been an incredibly tough 7 years, right? Just hard across the board. Nothing we've done at Kernel has been easy. It's still not easy. Building a company in this space is incredibly hard and complex, and trying to thread the needle, it just takes an enormous amount of focus and attention to detail. And I would just say that I am lucky to be working with a talented team of people who share that vision and desire to bring this technology that's so hard to both build and develop and now commercialize, they all want to bring it into the real world because we want to see the impact it's going to have on society at large, whether that's through patients or helping people just be their best selves. So I'm thankful for them. I'm thankful for obviously all the support of the investors that have been with us on this journey so far. Bryan for his initial vision. Without his in some ways crazy idea, right? Like and willingness to be bold and just take that first step to start a company and put up 50 million of his own just to seed this thing. Like we wouldn't be sitting here talking about the things we are. This is an incredibly hard problem to solve. And I think it's taken a really special group of people that see what the opportunity could be to get it to this point. And I think we're at this point in the world where everyone else is just about to catch up and see what we see. So I'm really excited.
I love it. Thank you so much, Ryan, for coming on the podcast. Everyone go to kernel.com/BrainAge, right? So you can figure out how old your brain is. And we'll do another podcast at the Kernel IPO.
All right. Thanks, Brom. Thanks, Ed.
Thanks, guys.